Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of our multi-threading in Java series. And in today's video, we will be uncovering one of the most misunderstood topics in Java multi-threading, which is interrupts. So you must have heard of interrupts in Java, right? What does it sound like? It sounds like you are asking someone to stop, right? It sounds like, hey, stop whatever you are doing. Now, if you add a little bit of politeness to it, that is what it means in Java, right? So in Java, an interrupt is a way to politely ask a thread to stop, not forcefully. This is very important. Interrupt is a way to politely ask a thread to stop, not to kill it forcefully, but to signal it to stop if it's in a position to do so. If thread is in a position to stop, then please stop or else keep running. Okay, so this is very important. Interrupt does not force, it asks the thread politely to stop if it can, right? So remember this definition. We will build more theory over this line later. So how do you interrupt a thread in Java, right? So suppose you have two threads, T1 and T2. How do you interrupt it? Very simple. To interrupt a thread, you call interrupt method on it, right? So if you have two threads, T1 and T2, and you want T2 to interrupt T1, you will simply write T1.interrupt inside T2's thread logic, right? Okay, so you are telling T1 to stop, that is why you call T1.interrupt. And which thread is trying to interrupt? T2 is trying to interrupt. So you write T1.interrupt inside T2, right? So this is pretty straightforward. And one more thing, whenever a thread is interrupted in between, an interrupted exception is thrown, right? So if T2 calls T1.interrupt, an interrupted exception will be thrown. So whatever logic you write for T1 in this try block, if in between it is interrupted, then interrupted exception will be thrown and this catch block will be executed, and you can handle the way you want to handle this interrupted exception, right? Now let's directly look at an example and see how interrupt works and see something very interesting. Okay, so this is a simple example. In this you have created a thread named myThread, and inside this thread, in the try catch block, you are executing an infinite loop, right? Which starts printing from 0 and it prints till infinity, right? And if an exception is thrown, if this thread is interrupted, then it will print system.out.println interrupted and break. So it will break out of this while loop as well, right? And this program will stop. Now what have we done in our main thread? In our main thread, we have created an instance of this class myThread. We have started that particular thread. So this will start executing. Then we are trying to interrupt this myThread from the main thread, right? That's why we have written myThread.interrupt. So I am sure 99% of you must be thinking, myThread, this class, whatever thread we have created, will be interrupted in the middle and an exception will be thrown and system.out.println interrupted will be printed, right? So this is what 99% of you might be thinking. Now let's go ahead and run this, right? So if I run this, you can see the thread keeps on running and it does not breaks out of the loop, right? But if I do one small tweak in this example, if I go here and instead of printing it immediately, I just go here and write thread.sleep, and after 5 milliseconds, okay, after every 5 milliseconds, let's print it, correct? Now when I go ahead and run this program, correct, after printing 0 itself, this got interrupted and system.out.println interrupted is printed in the logs, right? If I run it again interrupted is printed, right? So what is happening here? So this is the first property of interrupt. An interrupt will only interrupt a thread, right? This interrupt method will only interrupt a thread which is either waiting on sleep, wait, join, or blocking queue.take, right? Let me write it here. So an interrupt will only interrupt a thread which is either waiting on sleep, wait, join, or blocking queue.take. So these are the 4 functions on which if a thread is waiting on these 4 functions, right, then only the interrupted exception will be thrown, right? So here, as soon as we write thread.sleep, at that particular point of time, this thread was interrupted. So that's why when this thread was interrupted, an interrupted exception was thrown. Instead of this generic exception, you can write here interrupted exception as well, right? Then also our output will remain the same, correct? Okay, so this is the first thumb rule. Only in case of sleep, wait, join, and blocking queue.take will the thread be interrupted and an interrupted exception will be thrown, right? Now if I go ahead and show you in my in thread class, if I go ahead in thread class, you can see there is a variable name interrupted, right? So whenever a thread is interrupted, this variable is set to true, correct? Now let's remove this. And after printing, let's go ahead and print system.out. Or let's remove this for loop for now, right? Thread running, correct? And system.out.println thread.current thread is interrupted, right? So let's check what is the value of is interrupted here, correct? If I go ahead and run this, right, what you can see, it is constantly printing thread running and true, right? So we don't have sleep here, right? So we have not used thread.sleep here. Still, thread.current thread is interrupted is coming out to be true. Now here is where the definition which we told earlier, that interrupt is a way to politely ask a thread to stop. So this is where the politeness comes, right? Whenever you interrupt a thread in Java, interrupted variable is set inside the thread. Now it is the user's job to check if that interrupted flag is set or not. If that interrupted flag is set, then that is your job to perform further operations based on the interruption, right? Now if I write here thread.sleep 1000, now what will happen? Let's go ahead and run it, right? Thread was running, the interrupted flag was set to true, and the thread got interrupted, right? Now see, this is very important. This is also very important. So irrespective of whether you are using sleep, wait, join, or take or not, whether you are using it or not, if a thread is interrupted flag is always set, irrespective of whether you write this particular statement or not, right? But as soon as you write this statement and the interrupted flag is set, the interrupted exception is thrown only in case of sleep, wait, join, and take, right? I will repeat this once again. Listen it very carefully. Irrespective of whether you use sleep, wait, join, or take, if a thread is interrupted using interrupt method, then the interrupted flag of the thread will always be set to true. But interrupted exception will only be thrown if you have used one of these 4 functions, which are sleep, wait, join, or take, correct? So again, if I remove this and run it, the flag is set but exception is not thrown. If I go ahead and remove this, the flag is set, and since the flag is set, our JVM will see that sleep is called, then interrupted exception will be thrown and interrupted will be printed, right? Now one more thing. Here let's go ahead, before catch, this is the thing, and after catching the exception, instead of interrupted, after catch, right? After catch, what will happen, right? It was interrupted, so true will be printed. Then thread.sleep will get executed. As soon as it will wait on sleep, interrupted exception will be thrown, and our catch block will go ahead and start executing. Correct? Now let's see what is the value of interrupted flag after the exception is thrown. Correct? See, so thread was running before catch, before the exception was thrown, the value of interrupted flag was true. Now have you set this interrupted flag to false? No, you haven't. But JVM internally, after throwing the interrupted exception, internally has reset the interrupted flag to false. So after catch, if you print it, the interrupted flag is reset to false, right? And then this interrupted is printed. Correct? So that is why it is always recommended, if you are not using thread.sleep or anything, you have to manually check if thread.current thread is interrupted, if this is there or not. If it is there, then you perform cleanup or whatever thing you want to do, right? If a thread is interrupted, you have to manually check if you are not using thread.sleep, because interrupted exception will not be thrown. Now instead of is interrupted, what you use here is you use interrupted, right? So if you use interrupted, what will this interrupted do? It will return true as well if the thread was interrupted, and it will internally set the interrupted flag to false. If you see the implementation of this method, it will return the value of interrupted, but internally it will set that interrupted flag to false as well, right? So you don't have to explicitly set it. That is why people sometimes directly use this flag as well if you want to reset the flag, right? So this is how you handle it. I know this was too much to grasp at one go. So let's summarize it. What have we learned till now? Okay, so based on the discussion which we had now, these are the properties of interrupts that come out. So first is, whenever a thread is interrupted, the interrupted flag is set to true. We saw it just now, right? Now in case the thread is waiting on sleep, wait, join or blocking queue.take, the interrupted flag is set and also interrupted exception is thrown, right? And after interrupted exception is thrown, the flag is reset to false, correct? So this is the third property. Whenever interrupted exception is thrown, the interrupted flag is reset automatically to false, correct? Fourth, is interrupted. This method will only return true or false based on whether thread is interrupted or not. Interrupted method returns true or false, plus it resets the interrupted flag to false if it was set to true, correct? Now this is a small table that tells you the relationship between the thread state and what happens when you interrupt it. So whenever a thread is in new state, we have just created a thread but not started it, and if you try to interrupt it, then nothing will happen because thread has not yet started only, right? Now in runnable, if thread is running and you go ahead and interrupt that thread, at that point of time only the flag is set, but that needs to be checked manually, right? So without the sleep, if you remember, we will need to check if thread.current thread.interrupted, then perform cleanup or some XYZ task, whichever you want. Okay, so thread must check it manually, check this flag manually and do whatever it wants to perform. In case the thread is blocked or waiting or timed waiting, right? Wait, sleep and all this, the blocking method throws interrupted exception, correct? And if the thread is already terminated and you try to interrupt it, nothing will happen because thread is already done, right? Now let's move forward. Now you saw this, right? If I comment this out, or just this, if I comment this and write thread.sleep here and print and run it, you will see after true, false is printed, right? So interrupted flag is reset. So JVM automatically clears this particular flag. That's why the best practice is whenever an interrupted exception is thrown, you restore the flag by writing thread.currentThread.interrupt, right? So the best practice is whenever interrupted exception is thrown, you write here thread.currentThread.interrupt. So what it does, it again interrupts the current thread. Again interrupts means what it does, it just sets the interrupted flag to true. Now why do we do this? If I go ahead and run this, you will see true printed twice, right? Now why do we do this? Why this is the best practice to set the interrupted flag again after interrupted exception is thrown? Let's go on our whiteboard and understand this. Consider this example where you have built an app which has several layers associated with it. So there is a main thread, which is the top layer. That main thread calls the service layer, which handles the high level logic. Then it calls the worker layer that does some computation. And then finally we have a blocking layer, means a file where the thread actually waits on a particular queue or sleep or some blocking operation is there. And then you go ahead and interrupt this thread. When an interrupt is raised on this flag in blocking layer, the exception will be caught, right? And automatically the flag is unset from true to false, right? Now if the control goes back to the previous layer, right, control will go to the upper layer. Here, if you have a code to check whether the thread was interrupted or not, suppose you are checking using thread.currentThread.isInterrupted, then you will find it false. Why? Because it was already unset after the exception was thrown, and hence the worker layer will continue on processing instead of stopping it right there, right? So it is always a good practice to again set the flag using thread.currentThread.interrupt whenever an interrupted exception is thrown, right? So there are two good practices. First one, set the interrupted flag whenever an interrupted exception is thrown, and then check for the interruption in your code in all the layers, all the subsequent above layers where you want to stop your thread, right? Now we have seen how interrupts work during sleep, wait, join and blocking queue.take, right? Behavior is similar. Now what about when thread is waiting on synchronized block to acquire a lock or on ReentrantLock.lock, right? So these are the two cases when a thread waits to acquire a lock. If a thread is waiting to acquire a lock and you go ahead and interrupt that thread, whether the interrupted exception will be thrown or not. Let's see that using an example, right? So this is an example. What we are seeing here, we'll see whether a thread gets interrupted or not whenever it is waiting on a lock, right? So this is our example where we have created this class interruptible lock example. What we are doing, we have created an instance of that class. Post that we have created two threads, T1 and T2, and both of this thread is running this do work function, right? So we have done T1.start and T2.start. So T1.start, T1 will go ahead and acquire the lock, right? Then it will wait for 2 seconds. Then it will go ahead and finally unlock. As soon as it unlocks, T2 goes ahead and acquire the lock and performs the same thing. Now T1 is doing that, T2 is doing that. After that, we have written T2.interrupt in our main thread, right? So if T2 is waiting on this lock and we write T2.interrupt, then this try block will throw an interrupted exception, right? And interrupted while waiting for lock. This will get printed, correct? First interrupt sent to T2 and post that interrupted while waiting for lock will be thrown if the thread actually gets interrupted when it is waiting for the lock, right? So let's go ahead and check whether it gets interrupted or not. If I run this, what is the output? Interrupt is sent to T2 and interrupted while sleep, correct? So T2 was waiting on the lock, then at the same time T2 was interrupted, right? But no exception was thrown when it was waiting on the lock. Only the interrupted flag was set. But as soon as T2 went ahead and executed this statement, tried to execute this statement, it saw that interrupted flag is set, and hence the interrupted exception was thrown, as we saw in earlier examples as well, right? Whenever a thread is waiting on sleep, then interrupted exception is thrown and interrupted while sleep is getting printed, correct? If I go ahead and run this again same output will come, right? Interrupted while sleep. So clearly we can see here that we are not able to interrupt a thread when it is waiting on a lock. But if you want to perform that operation, if you want to make your thread to become interrupted when it is waiting for a lock, instead of lock.lock, just use lockInterruptibly, right? So this time when T2 will be waiting here, at that time T2 is interrupted, then this try block here itself will throw an interrupted exception, and interrupted while waiting for the lock will be printed, right? Correct? Interrupt sent to T2 and interrupted while waiting for the lock. Again, if I run it, interrupt sent to T2 and interrupted while waiting for a lock, right? So this is one more method for reentrant lock, how you can make a thread interruptible while waiting on a lock as well, right? So there is a way you can make the thread interruptible for reentrant.lock, which is by using lock.lockInterruptibly method. But there is no way for synchronized, right? For if a thread is waiting to acquire a lock on a monitor object for synchronized block, then there is no way you can make that particular thread interruptible, correct? This method only works for reentrant lock. So to summarize whatever we have learned till now, let's see this. If it is thread.sleep or wait or blocking queue.take or thread.join, can thread be interrupted immediately? Yes, it can be, right? And interrupted exception will be thrown, right? Flag is always set, and flag is also cleared automatically after interrupted exception is thrown, right? For reentrant lock.lockInterruptibly, for this also it can be interrupted, we saw just now, and flag is also set, and one of the most important thing, flag is automatically cleared while using lock.interruptibly as well, correct? If you use reentrant lock.lock or for synchronized, can it be interrupted immediately? No, we just saw in an example, right? It was not interrupted immediately. Flag is always set, whichever thread if you interrupted, flag is always set, but exception is not thrown. Exception is not thrown here also, using synchronized also, and also flag will not be automatically cleared. Why? Because exception is not thrown, so flag will not be cleared automatically. And for normal running thread, it is not blocked, so it cannot be interrupted. Flag is definitely set, you will have to check it manually, and since you are checking it manually, the flag is not cleared automatically, correct? So this is the summary of whatever we have learned now about interrupts, right? So this was the whole theory about interrupts. Now if you remember, in our last class we made our custom thread pool, right? We had a submit method, we were executing our task using this custom thread pool, but there was one problem here. If I run this, all the workers, they never stop. This program is not getting exited by its own. I have to go here and exit it manually, right? If I run it again, you can see it is not exited by its own, right? So to make this program stop by its own, we have to write our own shutdown method. Now how will our shutdown method look, right? So we'll create a method public void shutdown, correct? And for till the pool size, we'll go ahead and interrupts all the worker that we have, right? We'll go ahead and interrupt, and what happens when we interrupt a worker? If I go ahead and show you this class, whenever you interrupt, right? So all our workers will be waiting on blocking queue.take method, right? And whenever it waits on take method, and if you interrupt the worker, interrupted exception will be thrown. This is a good practice. You set the interrupt flag again, and then you break out of this loop, this while loop, right? So this is how you gracefully exit your thread pool. Now I'll go ahead and in our main function, after this, I will probably wait for 1 second for all the tasks to be completed, correct? And post that I'll do ThreadPool.shutdown, correct? And this I will add exception to method signature, correct? Now let's go ahead and run this, correct? When I run this, after 1 second, this shutdown method is called. Shutdown method goes ahead and interrupts all the workers. If workers are performing their task, they will perform their task first, correct? And as soon as they come here in waiting state, using task queue.take, at that particular point of time, they will check the interrupted flag. It is set. So interrupted exception will be thrown. They will come here, they will reset the flag, and they will break out and exit from this while loop. And this is how graceful shutdown works in your custom thread pool, correct? And this is the last piece of the puzzle that we solved. And this is our complete custom thread pool that we have created. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned about interrupts, right? I tried my best to explain you the interrupts in the best possible way possible. That's it for this video. Until the next video, stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.